And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times since then. The case has been put on the Planning Commission agenda simply to keep it alive, and it's been postponed by the Planning Commission every single time, and nothing has happened. So we then fast forward to July of last year again. The owner filed a demolition permit for the structure located on this property. When an owner files a demolition permit, we have a historic preservation office at my shop, and I have a historic preservation officer named Steve Sadowski. He's not able to join us today. He's unfortunately in the hospital right now, recovering from surgery. But his job is to research a demolition permit and to try and determine whether we should release that permit or whether we should take that permit to the Historic Landmark Commission for consideration for historic zoning. In doing research on the property, Steve, of course, discovered that the property, the building that's located on the property, was the home to the old Montopolis Negro School, which my understanding was served that function from 1935 through 1962. And then from 1967 onward, it was home to the Montopolis Church of Christ. Steve felt that based upon the criteria in our code, the property, the buildings, did merit historic zoning, and he did not agree to the release of the demolition permit. So he took the case to the Historic Landmark Commission, where they had a public hearing and discussed whether or not to release the demolition permit. That decision was held on November 26th of last year. And what happened there was the Landmark Commission voted 7-1 to initiate or to recommend historic zoning on the property. The code requires a 2/3 vote of the Landmark Commission in order to move the historic zoning case forward onto the Planning Commission and then onto the City Council. There are currently 11 Historic Landmark Commission members, one for each our 10 City Council districts and one for the mayor. And so it requires a vote of 8 Landmark Commission members to move the historic zoning forward. This case got 7 members in favor and 1 against. Therefore, under our code, the historic zoning case stopped right there. When the historic zoning case fails to move forward, we are obligated to issue a demolition permit for the property that the owner requested. That demolition permit expires 1 year after it is issued. The owner of the property currently has a city-issued demolition permit. He may tear down that building right now if he wants to. Legally, there is nothing the city can do about that. So we move forward. At that point, we started discussing, of course, with the applicant on the property, Mr. Stoll, what his intentions were for the property. The city feels very strongly about preserving this building because of its important part in our history. Mr. Stoll indicated to us that he did not want to tear the building down, that he was agreeable to saving the building, but that he needed to be able to develop the remainder of the property in order to pay for the restoration of the building. So I committed to Mr. Stoll and his representatives at the Drenner Group, a law firm, that I would work with him as closely as possible to try to get to the point where we could all come to an agreement and that the building could be preserved, restored, and that he would be allowed to develop the property in other ways, the remainder of the property, in order to pay for that restoration. So in March 28th of this year, I asked the Planning Commission to initiate a city-initiated historic zoning case for this property, with the city being the applicant, that being myself. The reason I did that, what that means, is simply that Mr. Stoll did not have to pay the city application fee for filing that property. So that would normally cost probably a couple $1,000. In an attempt to try to work with him, to encourage him to work with me on saving the building and not exercising the demolition permit, which he was legally entitled to, I thought by saving him that couple $1,000 that would be a gesture of goodwill. So on March 28th, the Planning Commission agreed to that. On April 24th, we actually completed the paperwork and got the zoning case formally rolling. On May 4th of this year, a notice was mailed to everyone who lives within 500 feet, or owns property within 500 feet of the property, that a zoning case had been filed. And on June 15th of this year, a notice was mailed out that there was going to be a hearing for the case. The case number, in case y'all need it, is C14H 2015-0055. That's the zoning case of which the city is formally the applicant. We also have the neighborhood plan case, of which the owner is the applicant, and the two of them run side by side. The purpose of the neighborhood plan amendment, well, I'll get to that when we talk about it. Okay, so back to the schedule. Sure, C14H 2015-0055.
It's also on the agenda.
Oh, 2017. Sorry, C14H 2017-0055. I'm sorry for the wrong in there. So the H in that signifies the historic zoning case. The schedule so far for the public hearing has been, the case went before the landmark commission. So this case needs to go to 3 different bodies for several different things. For the plan amendment and the zoning case, as well as the historic aspect of the zoning case, we need to go to the Historic Landmark Commission, we need to go to the Planning Commission, and we go to the City Council. The Landmark Commission makes a recommendation, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, and the City Council makes the actual decision. So where we're at on those hearings are the Landmark Commission postponed the case on both June 26th and July 24th of this year, and it's currently scheduled to go before them on August 28th of this year. That would be at City Hall and the City Council chambers at 7 o'clock on August 28th. They are not going to be discussing the merits of the plan amendment, neighborhood plan amendment, or of the land use decision for the zoning case. Their job in this process is to discuss whether the building, the Montopolis Negro School, is a historic structure or not. Obviously, this question has already been before them. It was before them last November, and they voted 7-1 to recommend it, but as I said, it needed 8 votes. We're coming back before them. This time, we're not coming before them with a question of a demolition permit has been filed. Should that be granted or not, or should the historic zoning be initiated? This time, we have an agreement from the applicant that he is supportive of historic zoning for the structure. We also have a staff recommendation that the structure be zoned historic, as well as a buffer around the structure. We're still discussing how much that is, 20, 25 feet, something like that. So, the Landmark Commission will be hearing the case for a second time. As I said, I believe that the vote may possibly be different this time. One, we have a different makeup of the Landmark Commission. The members have changed, new members have been appointed, and we no longer have a contentious case. We have an agreement between the city and the applicant that the building is in fact historic. So August 28th is the next hearing day.
Just a point of clarification, so that was 8, there's 3 others, were they just not present for the vote?
Yes, they're not present for the vote. So, the planning commission, the case has been before the planning commission. We mail out notices to you guys, or the people within 500 feet, telling them about this case. Sometimes what happens is one commission postpones it, and therefore the other commission can't hear it. So, the order process is Landmark Commission, Planning Commission, City Council. So the case was notified for the July 11th Planning Commission, but we postponed it there because it had not gone to the Landmark Commission yet. We postponed it to August 8th. I can tell you right now, we're not going to hear the case on August 8th because we're not going to the Landmark Commission until August 28th. So on August 8th at the Planning Commission, I'm going to be asking for a postponement, telling them that we have to wait to hear from the Landmark Commission on the historic nature of the building, and therefore I'm going to ask them to postpone that case there until September 12th. So again, important dates are August 28th for the Historic Landmark Commission, question of whether the building is historic or not. September 12th for the Planning Commission, where we're going to discuss both the historic nature, because that is their purview as well as the plan amendment, as well as the zoning case. Right now, the case has been notified for the August 10th City Council meeting, but of course that is not going to happen because I am not going to the Planning Commission until September 12th, and the case needs to be heard by the Planning Commission for their recommendation before we go to the City Council. So therefore, on August 10th, I'm going to be asking that the City Council postpone the case until September 28th. So if everything stays on the schedule that we're asking for right now, we have August 28th Landmark Commission, September 12th Planning Commission, and September 28th City Council. So that is.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure.
Because you said land commission out of planning?
Historic Landmark Commission, August 28th. City Council, September 12th. I'm sorry, Planning Commission, September 12th. City Council, September 28th. Okay? Now, one of these commissions may postpone it, and that schedule is going to get shifted downward again. But right now, that is our anticipation. If there are no postponements, those are the dates. Okay? So that's kind of how we got here. Now we're going to talk about what we're doing. This tract, and I hope y'all got the copy of the information package that up here in front. Not that you're going to get one, but it has a lot of detail about the case. I'll first talk about the plan amendment. The Montopolis Neighborhood Plan has a thing called the future land use map. When the plan was worked on and approved by the City Council adopts this map as a part of the plan. It is what the neighborhood worked on, it's what the City Council approved, for what types of land uses they would like to see in the future in this particular area. It is not on zoning, it does not zone the property. Rather, it's used as a tool for guidance for the City Council when they are asked for a zoning change. They can see what the neighborhood said when they did the neighborhood plan, what they would like to see in the future for the area. So this particular tract right here has a future land use map designation of single family. The applicant is requesting that be changed to mixed use. Mixed use would allow him to ask for, or in this case, me on his behalf, for a zoning change other than single family. Staff is supporting that request to a mixed use zoning to allow for the zoning case to move forward, to allow for a mixture of uses other than just single family residential. The property is rather unique in that it has a rather large area of right of way bisecting it. At one time, a long time ago, and you probably see this better in the blown up map. But this one shows the time.
Does anybody need interpretation? ¿Necesita hablar en español? ¿O todo está bien en inglés? Okay, all right, just want to make sure. Go ahead.
So, we have Deborah here Deborah can help anybody. So, what we have is a long time ago, I can't remember exactly when, the City Council was a plan to extend Grove Boulevard in this direction. So at some point in time, the city either purchased or condemned, I don't know which, this piece of property going through the middle of this property, okay? So obviously that has not gone through. You know, Grove Boulevard does not run through the middle of this property. I don't know of any current plans to move Grove Boulevard through the middle of that property. Those plans, I think, were drawn up and never will be followed through. So obviously it's difficult for this property to be developed with a right-of-way going through it, which is really just grass, there's no road there. But it's property that's owned by the city that the city could put a road on if they wanted to. The city doesn't see a need to put that road through there anymore. As I said, that plan has been given up. And so therefore the applicant, the property owner, is asking for what we call a vacation of the right-of-way. Basically what that means is he is asking to be able to purchase back from the city that piece of property, that white piece of property, or this area right here, so that he can again have the whole rectangle available for development. So the plan amendment is to go from single family to mixed use. You know, 28 acres. The entire property, I think, is 2.0. 2.0. So that is something that the City Council will make a decision about. I anticipate probably at the same time that they decide on the zoning case. So the City Council, that property is owned by the city. It's up to the City Council whether to allow him to buy it back or not. As I said, the city right now, the city staff, the transportation staff, this decision really is, has decided that there's no longer a transportation need for that roadway segment, which doesn't connect on either side of the property to anything. So we went through the plan amendment. The next part is the zoning request. As I said, technically, I am the applicant on the zoning case as the city, but really, of course, the property is privately owned, and as I said, I was just doing that to try to encourage the preservation of the structure by making it a little bit more financially feasible for Mr. Stone. So the request of the planning commission in the state of zoning case is called GRMU zoning. That stands for community commercial mixed use zoning. I am not prepared this time, part of the reason is because we're here to hear your input. I'm not prepared this time to say what our staff recommendation is on that aspect of this case. We would like to hear from you all. We recommend something possibly one notch lower than that, but I can tell you that we are going to probably recommend something other than just single family, which is what the property already has. Mr. Stola has indicated to us that his intentions with the property are to save the Montopolis Negro School building on the property, to restore it, and to use it for several different possibilities. It could possibly be a small office building, it could possibly be a small restaurant, coffee shop kind of thing. But anyway, he intends to restore the building, leave it where it's at, and use it for something that is economically viable. On the back portion of the property along Kemp Street, the proposal is to build, I believe, 5, is that correct? 5 houses. So there is no plans for high-rise condos, there's no plans for condos, period. I can tell you that the GRMU or LRMU category allows for a variety of uses. One thing I've already told Mr. Stoll is that we would recommend a prohibition of multifamily uses on the property. I do not want to see the whole property developed, even with the school preserved as an apartment complex. So we would prohibit multifamily residential. We would still allow single-family residential, which is already allowed here today. You could build 5 houses along Kemp. We would recommend that the only access to Kemp be for the single-family portions of the property, not for any commercial uses. As I said, he intends to restore the school and use it for something, and that's what we determine. And then on the remainder of the property, my understanding is that what he would like to do is to build a small office building between the school and the houses. And adjacent to the school, or closer to Montopolis Drive, to build a small retail store. So possible uses are a small retail store, a small office building, the restoration of the Montopolis Negro School, and 5 houses.
Sorry, I mean, I think, I'm not sure. So, there some definitions that I need to find, like, what does the whole office building mean?
Small office building means I'm still discussing with Mr. Stoll the size of that building, because I want to be very specific in this case. When we go to city council, we have questions to build there, not to leave it too wide open. I'm still in discussions with him about the possible size of the office building. My understanding is something on the order of 3,000 to 4,000 square feet.
And 4,000 flats, 3,000 stories.
That we're still working on. I think it would depend upon, I think he's still working with an architect to come up with what's feasible for the project. I can't anticipate it being any taller than 2 stories. I'll get the maximum.
And then can you define for me what a community commercial?
Sure, community commercial is a zoning category, it's GR, it doesn't make any sense, I get that. It used to stand for general retail a long time ago. It's been renamed to community commercial now. It is a category that allows for office uses, it allows for retail uses, it allows for a wide variety of uses. I am not prepared this time to say we're recommending that zoning category. We may recommend something lower than that, possibly LR zoning, which stands for neighborhood commercial. The MU portion of
Sorry,
this.
I cannot listen because
Okay,
what
so
does
LR used to stand for light retail. Now it stands for neighborhood commercial. And it also allows for office and commercial uses, but it allows for fewer of them. Okay? So the staff may recommend LRMU instead of GRMU. That is something I'm still discussing with Mr. Stone. But anyway, our intention is to work with him on his plan right now, which, as I said, is 5 houses, pretty small office building, restoration of the school, and a small, again, I'm thinking about the same size, retail store on Montopolis. Mr. Stoll has indicated that he needs those uses in order to pay for the restoration of the school and, of course, to get an economic return on the property. Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry.
sorry, you may have explained this and it may have overpassed me, but, so we're looking at restoring the school
Yes.
to use as commercial, but not for any actual historic preservation purposes.
Well, it would need to be, so, if the staff is asking that the property be zoned historic, we always have. Mr. Stoll is in agreement to the historic zoning, okay?
But to be used commercially.
To be restored and to be used for something.
So I could have like potential office space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Historic
Potential like
zoning,
hipster cafe that's called the Negro School.
historic zoning does not by itself, what historic zoning?
With no blue
is
bonnets,
that you
right?
Historic zoning means that you cannot tear down the property, okay, the building. It also means that anything you do to the building needs the approval of the Historic Landmark Commission. So it doesn't mean you can just, okay, now it's zoned historic, I can't tear it down, I can do whatever the heck I want with it. It means that the restoration effort itself is gonna be reviewed by the city staff, and it's gonna be taken to the Landmark Commission for their approval. And of course, our goal is to get it as close as possible to its original condition. I think you all know what the building looks like right now. It looks vastly different than it did at the point that we're trying to get it to. So, under historic zoning, once that historic zoning is granted by the city council, he can never tear it down, okay? Anything he does to it, will have a public hearing and a review by the Landmark Commission and the city staff, okay? The zoning itself though, so it would have possibly GRMUH zoning. The H zoning means you can't tear the building down, but the part before that says what you can do with it, you know what I mean? So when we talk about the zoning, we got the historic part of it, then we got the what can you do part of it. And whether it be GRMUH, or LRMUH, we're talking about a mixture of small office, small retail, and 5 houses, plus the restoration of the building for a use probably to be determined. But it could not just be any use, it has to be use that's allowed within that realm. So, we will be taking that request, as I said, the first step is to the Landmark Commission, and then the Planning Commission and City Council. The most important thing to the city in this case is that the building stay there, and that it be restored, and that it never be torn down. The unfortunate thing for the city, as I started this whole conversation with, is that there is a demolition permit currently alive for the property. So right now, legally, the property, the building could be torn down, there's nothing I can do about it.
What was that,
The
what was
good
the
thing-
demolition permit granted in the first place? Why was that sought?
It was sought because Mr. Stoll bought the property, I'm gonna try to put words in his mouth, but he bought the property, my understanding is he did not know what the building was, he just thought it was a, building on the property, and he filed a demolition permit. It wasn't until my staff, my historic preservation staff, started reviewing that demolition permit, and discovered what the building used to be, that we were aware of this. So.
Which isn't accurate, because we solicited the historic zoning request, and you heard that from us. So I would like to hear from you, why did you seek the demolition?
I think I'm gonna go ahead and finish my presentation first.
Just to be
okay?
clear and honest with the room.
I'm gonna finish my presentation first. Just 1 second, sir. Okay, so it's important to me that because the demolition permit exists, that we, I guess say collectively, but certainly myself as representative of the city, work with Mr. Stoll to discourage, strongly discourage, as strongly as we possibly can, is using that demolition permit. And he has told us he does not intend to use that permit, so that's good news. So we can go together to the Landmark Commission, to the Planning Commission, to the City Council, and say, we are all in agreement on the preservation and restoration of the building. As far as restoration of the building goes, our first preference is, of course, it stay exactly where it is right now, and it's simply be fixed up. And that's what Mr. Stoll has agreed to. There was in the past a possibility discussed of moving the building someplace else on the same property. That would be our second choice. That is, we prefer it stay put, but that is something, if it came down to it, we'd be willing to talk to him about. But at this point, my understanding is that that's not, that is not needed. And of course, our last choice is the building be torn down and removed to some other city. But right now, I don't think that that is a possibility, because he has agreed to work with us on sort of building. Sir, do you have a question?
Yes, I know the background of the school and the property adjacent to the school. The property adjacent to the school was the property of the St. Edward's Baptist Church. The St. Edward's Baptist Church also donated the land that the school is on. Now, the city came in the 1980s, the late 1980s, when they proposed to extend Grove Boulevard from where it is now all the way over to Montopolis, and condemned the property that was owned by the St. Edward's Baptist Church. And the city now owns that property.
That's correct.
And I can't see why the city owns that property, and the building seems to be a problem for the developer and what he wants to do. Why can't the city just move the building onto their property and let it be used for community use instead of being commercial?
That's a good question. So the property that the city owns is of course the strip.
Yes.
You mean the white strip that's on your
Yes.
map? I suppose that is a possibility. I can tell you that from a historic perspective, I wish Steve were here, but as I said, sorry, he can't be. The best option is to leave the building where it historically has been. There is a possibility that Mr. Stoll may decide to offer the city the building for sale. You know what I mean? That is something that's frankly above my pay grade. That would be a decision, a monetary decision, that would probably need to be made by the city council, whether the city was interested in buying the building. Moving the building is probably not our first preference, even if it's just scooting it over onto the strip of Anita's right of way. Our concern with that is that sometimes buildings of this age can be in fragile shape. And sometimes when you go to move them, you know, we've had instances of historic houses that were meant to be moved and didn't end well. So we always think it's best to leave the building where it's at and restore it at its existing location.
Have you had
Keeping its historic character.
engineers to go in and determine that the building needs to stay where it is?
My historic preservation officer, Steve Sadowski, went out and looked at the building, and he thinks that it is restorable in its condition. It's gonna take a lot of work. The foundation is not very strong. But he thinks that it is restorable back to its original condition, or as close as we can get. There's another possibility
You
is
still
that.
didn't answer my question.
Okay.
I asked, has it been determined that the building cannot be, I know you said there's a possibility if you move the building, that there are things that happen with older buildings and historical buildings. But has it been determined on this building that it cannot be moved?
No, I don't think that hasn't been determined. It's impossible to know if that happened. I can tell you that, you know, my historic preservation folks always tell me our first choice is to leave buildings where they are, to keep their historic context. Another possibility may be that the building stays put, and that, you know, like I said, Mr. Stoll, city possibly could buy the building, or the building could also be used for some sort of community use with Mr. Stoll's agreement. You know what I mean? There's a possibility.
Well, you know, if the city's gonna do land swapping, I think the city needs to get something out of this too, and the community needs to get something.
What the city would get out of by state law, and this is something that we have no discretion on, is that if the city council agrees to what we call the vacation of that right of way,
Yes.
it's a fancy word for saying. If the city agrees to give up that right of way, which we think there's not transportation needs anymore, then he is obligated to pay the fair market value. The city cannot make him pay more, and the city cannot take less. There literally has to be an appraisal done, I think it's already been done, and then the city has to pay that exact dollar amount, if they agree to it. They're not obligated to agree to it, but if they agree to it, they have to pay that exact dollar amount. And that's it.
But the city can also, like they condemned the land when the church owned the land, the city owns the land, so they don't, I mean, they don't have to.
That's correct. The
They
city
don't
does
have
not,
to
the city
swap.
does not
They
have to
don't have
make.
to swap it, they don't have to sell.
No, there's no proposal right now for a swap per se, there's only a proposal for a sale.
I want to see the school preserved. I appreciate what the developer has said to this point, what he would like to do. But I don't want to see the school used for commercial use, if we can avoid it.
I'll continue to work with Mr. Stoll, period. As I said, and I don't want to speak for him, but obviously restoring the school is gonna cost money. You know, another possibility is Mr. Stoll, if the city, and I, again, this is, decisions made above me, probably by city council, but the city could probably also offer to buy the property as it exists in Mr. Stoll. In which case, it would be the city's obligation to fix it up, but of course, there would be a cost associated with that. Another possibility is Mr. Stoll restores the building himself, sells it to the city, or Mr. Stoll restores the building, uses it for commercial use, or Mr. Stoll restores the building and, I don't know, leases it to the city for a community center, or something like that. There's all sorts of possibilities in there, and I think that in order for Mr. Stoll to make those decisions, he needs to first know what he can do on the other pieces of property, because of course it's an economic decision. Yes, sir.
Well, isn't it true that the city could use the hotel occupancy tax, either tourist venue, historic or cultural preservation, by not only the building, but the property, and it would be paid for the people who sleep in the tourists who sleep in the hotel beds downtown and across the city. So it doesn't even have to come to the property tax or anything.
I believe it's a possibility. I hear what you're saying.
Well, the mayor's office,
certainly,
they thought it was possible.
certainly,
It's true at the Palm School.
We call historic heritage tourism, as a part of the Austin Convention and Visitor Bureau, and they name it now Visit Austin. And I do know that they, I used to know a woman who worked in that area, and they do use, we call hot taxes, so occupancy taxes, for, things like, stores walking through from 6th Street and side restorations and stuff like that, so.
And historic buildings and all that, right?
So, I believe it would be possible, but I'm afraid to answer you 100% sure, because I'm not a tax lawyer in the city, but it sounds
You might
possible.
explore that.
Okay. Sorry, I lost track of who was next.
She was in the pink and then.
I'm sorry.
back here.
First of all, thank you for being here to answer our questions, because I know it's a tough crowd, right? But
So
the
far, so
reason is,
good.
let me explain this. Why is the city selling our public property in the first place? Who gave them that authority?
Well,
Where does that come from?
The property is privately owned, with the exception of the old road right away that goes through the middle of the property. So
Which the city took by
the rest
eminent
of it-
domain.
The rest of it is owned by Mr. Stoll. He bought the property, who he bought from somebody. And then we have that, that old piece of grove that never got built and kind of doesn't connect to anything. That is owned by the city. So the decision about whether to sell that back to Mr. Stoll is a decision that the city council will be making. I can tell you the transportation department decided we don't use the road anymore, right? I mean, the road is done. That was a plan from back in the day that it got differently. Mr. Stoll, though, obviously, given the way that right-of-way, the width of that right-of-way, and the way that it bisects the track, it makes the track very difficult to develop. You know what I mean? It'd be like if you had a rectangle and there was a big, diagonal swath through the middle of it, it makes it really hard to use the property, for a cohesive development. So I believe that's why he's asking. Thank you.
Actually, I have two questions. Actually, that heritage grade that you spoke about, the Visit Austin, I'm working on.
Hey, Debbie, I didn't recognize you down there.
That's exactly what it is for, so that is a good idea. If you roll mixed use into it, what prevents him from then going ahead and using it for multifamily?
Because I have told him that we will not recommend.
Other than that,
multifamily. Well, I'm recommending that the city council have these conditional zone, so it would be what we call conditional overlay.
Right now.
Yeah, the conditional overlay in the ordinance for no multifamily.
Are his plans thus far in draft form written anywhere that are available?
They're in draft form. So the stage we're at right now is zoning, right? So the decision is what can you do on the property? We're not at the site plan stage where you say exactly where the building is. But of course, for him to decide on what he's asking for, he's, I think, already done some preliminary sketch work with architects or engineers, whatever, to do that. I've seen some sketches, but they're very rough. Those won't be nailed down with the zoning case. What I can do with the zoning case is condition it such that we get as close as possible to the proposed site plan, right? So I can prohibit multifamily, I can limit the height, I can limit the size square footage of the office, I can limit the square footage of the retail, I can limit the square footage of the restaurant, have the possibility of a coffee shop kind of thing. So those are my decisions as the city council. I'm talking right now is what I would recommend to the city council, but they do this with almost every zoning case.
I just think it would go a long way if his intentions were written down about not tearing down the school so that the public understood that.
I can tell you, he's been telling me for months and.
Right, telling me.
Publicly. Right, and then, until the council approves the historic zoning, it's all this talk, but I can tell you the good news is we have an ongoing dialogue and no disagreement on the preservation of the building. I think David,
So, you said the city's appraised that,
Mr. Stoll has to present an appraisal, I believe how it's worked, this is another department that does it, but
Okay.
I think he has an appraisal done, that appraiser, appraisal gets reviewed by our appraisers.
Okay.
They agree that the price is, and the city council decides whether to tell
okay,
them.
and specifically, I'm asking about the vacated,
Yes,
city
yes.
only portion.
Yes.
So appraisal is done, we have, is that information available, how much is it?
I don't know what the amount is, I know that he filed the application with the transportation department, I believe, but I don't know what those numbers are, they might still be being discussed.
Okay, and in terms of the value of the property, is it true that generally under single-family zoning, the compared to mixed-use zoning, that would actually increase the value of the property entitlement? So how does that affect what's being
Well,
negotiated here?
That is really a question for an appraiser, I'm not an appraiser. Generally speaking, it seemed logical to me that if you had a property that was zoned for this use, and you had a property that was zoned for this use, and this use was more than this use, that the property is more valuable. But we've been talking about this a lot in Code X, as you know. And so, appraisals are based upon a whole variety of factors, market conditions, adjacent land sales, et cetera, et cetera. The zoning is not the sole factor of what a property is worth. So I can't tell you how much more it would be worth if it got LR or GR, MU zoning versus the SF3 zoning. I presume it would be worth more. I don't know how much, and I don't know for sure that it would.
Right, and what I'm getting with this, I'm saying that once the zoning, the increased entitlements are approved, now when we sit down to negotiate to purchase the property from them, we're gonna be paying a lot more.
No, because
Now, hang on, listen, because now it's gonna be worth more, his entitlements are more valuable.
But the appraisals being done right now with the existing zoning, and the application is in vacation right now. And I would anticipate the vacation and the zoning and the plan amendment all going to the city council at the same time. So the appraisal would not be based upon the new zoning, the appraisal would be based upon the existing.
Well, but I'm saying, when he sits down to negotiate, he's gonna say, I'm gonna negotiate the deal based on the increase in entitlements.
I can tell you that.
I will, and then, what is the purchase price been named yet for?
No, I don't know what that is yet. But I can tell you that state law, and again, this is another department, I'm just telling you what I've learned, is real specific about how much we have to pay for a property. I think because they want to avoid shenanigans, right? They want to avoid a city council paying a favored developer more than the land is worth. You know what I mean? They want to avoid the applicant, just like that. So literally there needs to be like 2 third-party appraisals, and then the city council says, we decide whether or not we're going to sell the land for this much. But it's not a negotiated deal, it's what the appraiser says. Who's the next question?
Yeah, I wanted to thank, what's your name again?
Jerry Rustoven.
Jerry Russell, I want to thank for seeing the property and taking initiative and filing yourself and everything. Because a lot of the members of our city government don't take much initiative.
Yeah, and I just don't want people to be confused when they see the applicant being the city of Boston, like, that was just to try to work with them.
Just trying to get, that was great of you. Now, so I wanted to ask a couple questions. Does the city of Austin have historic value? Is there black history and other history that's of historic value in this town?
Yes, we have criteria that we use, the Landmark Commission uses, the city council uses, in deciding whether or not the property is historic. And again, I wish Steve were here, he could be more specific. There are 5 criteria. Great if I try to name 5, I'm gonna do Rick Barry, so. I can tell you one of them is, I'm gonna try. Architecture, is it architecturally significant? Is there historical association with the property? Is there community value to the property? That's what we have here. There's no landscape element to it. I'm gonna do Rick Perry and not remember the 4th and 5th one.
Archaeology.
Archaeology, thank you, Frank. So, we certainly think that based upon the community value and its historical association, that it merits historic zoning. We were 1 vote away last time from moving that forward. I think now with an agreement, and probably a different makeup of the commission, that we can get the 8 votes. And I frankly don't think, well, I won't go there, but I'm the applicant now. So, I'm gonna take the case to the city council. You know what I mean, with the historic zoning stuff.
Was it Mr. Stoll? That's
So,
the Stoll?
Mr. Stoll, yes, he's from.
And are they from Texas or Austin or anywhere?
I don't know where he's from. I know I've worked with him on other properties, you know, on other zoning cases. I've known him for a while.
Okay, and there's been other properties recently that have been, gone through this process and have been designated, right? Like maybe the Norwood House or?
Oh, yes, we do historic zoning cases.
So
I
there
don't say
is-
all the time, but yes.
There
you know,
is happening.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
good.
yes.
That's all I have.
Hi, my name's Jesus. I grew up in Dutch Springs, but also facing a lot of this kind of stuff. And I was wondering why is this material or this presentation in Spanish, since like the majority of the neighborhood is Hispanic? And what kind of notice did you do in the community?
The notice does have, is in Spanish. On the back page, the two-page form, and one page of the notice is in Spanish, talking about the filing of the case and the public hearings that I discussed earlier. If you would like to have the information, we just actually frankly put this package together today. If you'd like to, I could try to have it translated by somebody at the office. If you'd like to be able to hand it out, I can do that. It might take me a little while, but you know, I'd certainly be open to that. You know, we try to have, you have Deborah here to provide transportation services, so that's what we try to do. But the notices that go out, the legally required notices, the notice that goes to everybody within 500 feet, that is in Spanish. And it's both. Fred?
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of things, make a couple of points, and then also ask you a question. Regarding how the right-of-way came into the city's possession, you seemed equivocal about that. There is no equivocation. I have the actual ordinance from 1987 where the city condemned St. Edward's Baptist Church to build that road and then never built the road. 30 years later, here we are. Okay? So that's point one. Point two has to do with historic preservation. Some of you might not know, and it wasn't mentioned by Mr. Rusthoven, what actually took place at the Historic Landmark Commission was a 7-1 vote. Okay? Mr. Panju, Mr. Zimmerman's appointee, is no longer on that commission. He was the one no vote. But what was at issue would have allowed Mr. Stovall to move the building, which Mr. Rusthoven said would violate its historic context and historic integrity. So my question to you, Mr. Rusthoven, has to do with the fact that this is not just a building, it's a cultural landscape, and our city is supposed to be following the National Register of Historic Places rules. National Register Bulletin 36 identifies this as both an ethnographic and a vernacular cultural landscape. Has Mr. Sadowski, have you performed a proper cultural landscape analysis of this property that goes beyond just the building?
I tell you, Mr. Sadowski has reviewed the request, both as the demolition request, you know, it was a long time ago, and the current request for historic zoning. And he feels that the building needs to be preserved.
It's a yes or no question, sir. Yes or no? Cultural landscape, not the building. Cultural landscape.
The reality of the situation, I have to deal with the reality of the situation, is that right now he holds a demolition permit. I want to do everything I can for him not to use that demolition permit. In order for him to not use that demolition permit, I have to allow for an economic use of the property that can be used to pay for the restoration of the building.
I'll take that as a no. Thank you. I know other people have questions, so I'll take that as a no.
Okay. Is there anybody, if I get, is there anyone else here in this book?
I have a comment. Just a little while ago, he said that he wasn't going to use that demolition permit. Why do you keep throwing that out to us?
Because he has it. And
But
so,
you just said that he wouldn't do it.
he
that you
says
had
he will
no
not use it,
authority.
he says he will not use it as long as we work together to come up with an economically viable project for him on the property. Okay, so, you know, obviously, you know, buying a historic building, buying a piece of property with a historic building on it, restoring the historic building, and then turning it over for community use is probably not a sustainable business model. So, because he has already purchased the property, and because, again, in our opinion, unfortunately, the building permit has been issued, it's beyond our control, legally beyond our control. I now feel it's my job to do everything I can to make sure the building is preserved. The way to do that.
You bought a lemon, you want to help him make lemonade. I get it.
To do an economically viable project on the property that can be used to pay for that restoration so that we can save the building.
He's never He's never gonna knock down the building because the community will never give him the right of way if he does that.
Is there gonna be?
Those are two different questions legally.
I'm sorry.
That's what I'm doing right now.
No, I'm sorry, the applicant presentation. Is that-
The applicant, no, well, legally I am the applicant, but the owners of the property are here, you know, and they said that they would be available any questions. I'm trying to get through my part first.
Just out of respect, because I know folks gotta go home, and if we can get to that point, it would be.
Trying to get all the questions answered, sir.
Going back to what Fred was speaking on, the historical landscape. The portion of the property that is now right of way was the property of St. Edward's Baptist Church, which was founded in 1865. So that land has historical significance as well as the land that the school is. I think that should be in the.
But he doesn't believe cultural landscapes exist.
Yeah, generally speaking,
Only buildings exist.
historic structures, you know, is most of what we deal with. And, you know, again, our goal here is to save the structure. It may mean some other portions of the property that are used for, you know, some other things, like houses, et cetera. Again, my goal is to save the house and have save the school and have the school restored. Yes, sir.
Yes, I keep hearing save the structure, save the structure. The structure hasn't been used since, oh, Lord knows when.
Right.
I mean, I've been here 35 years, and the thing that the community uses it as is take pictures with their children. Families come over from different parts of the cities. I mean, they come all the way from Lockhart, Bastrop, just to take pictures with the children, you know, in different like forms and fashions, and they got their little Facebooks going, and their life is better, and it makes the community so much happier, right? And for someone to come in and just take that, you know, or try to make Montopolis or Eastside into a LA, right? And not only raise the taxes of our grandmothers that've been living here for so long, you know, it's not right, because they don't even know that this meeting exists today. They're sitting there at home, like, dumbfounded, you know?
Yes, sir. I don't know if you had a question in there for me, but.
No, it really wasn't a question. It was, you know, kind of rhetorical.
Okay.
But there's a pretty important point there. You're focused on buildings. This really whole thing is a historic landscape. And the current model is essentially a demolition permit for the entire neighborhood, this entire section of the city. There's historic and unprecedented gentrification that's been happening in Austin. It's by the numbers of the most racist gentrification that's happened anywhere in the country, and it's been largely displacing black people, and it's been largely focusing on houses and structures, just like you're talking about right now. And it seems to me that you're propagating the culture within the city of focusing on structures and not communities, therefore continuing the displacement of people of color from the city. And people aren't here because they're really worried about a particular structure, they're worried about a community.
Well, sir,
And we
my
think that there
opinion-
should be something the city, you know, the mayor talks a lot about being committed to affordability. He talks a lot about being committed to equity and to racial justice. And we see that this whole process flying in the face of those very things. We're not here to talk about structures, we're here to talk about ways we can preserve this community. And there's lots of things to say here.
There are obviously larger issues here that I cannot solve in a zoning case or a plan amendment case. I do feel that this structure is important to the community, and it's my obligation as a city employee to do what I can to save that. Larger issues of gentrification, et cetera, are something frankly that are beyond my abilities. I understand your concerns. Certainly I hear it every day at work. Working at Code Next, I hear it a lot. But my job for this particular case right now is to try to save that building, because I do think it's an important part of this community's history, and that's what I'm trying to do. Yes, ma'am.
I moved to this area. I've been in Austin for almost 20 years, in other states. And when I was looking about 12 years ago for a place to live, and I lived just down the street, in condos. And initially we were looking, you know, for something we could afford. There weren't a lot of options for smart housing for communities that were diverse. And to have things like, you know, a golf course, a library, of course, and a big park were really attractive. But for a young black family to be located in a place that had such strong Black history, I found was unique. And now, 12 years later, we could afford, within reason, to move out of Austin. And one reason that we stay in the community is because of the history. And so when we're talking about displacement of Black families and where they could go, this should be a pearl in Austin, a way to draw people to want to live into those single family homes because of the rich history. So I'm hoping that with, is there any way to build in if the school is renovated to try to make sure that whatever its purpose is, the office buildings, the retail space are attractive for the people who live here.
Yes, we feel that, for the words of Steve's mouth, historic preservation officer, but I think a lot of people drive by that building every day and don't know what it is. You know what I mean? It's a thin building.
Oh, come on.
And so, that's great. That's great.
We all know this.
We live here, man, we know what it is.
I think it's fair to say a lot of people don't know what that building is.
Maybe from your part of
I
town.
think that if
Maybe from Westlake or something,
if
yes.
the building were restored, you know what I mean, back to its condition, if we put, plaques in front of it, talking about the history of the building and why it's there, and the story behind it, which is, I think, an important story to tell. It's not a pretty part of our history, but it is part of our history. I think people need to know about it. The more people would be aware of that history if we restored the building and let them know what it was. You know what I mean? As opposed to just being, building in a field that hasn't been used for.
Then follow the National Register rules and do the cultural landscape
I'm not
analysis.
saying exactly what the use of the building would be. I think it's important the building be restored and people know its history.
Because it's only about buildings.
So I appreciate your intention, I understand your attempt, but I think your words are damaging. To give the impression that the community does not know what that is obviously not true.
I'm not saying everybody, I'm just saying a lot of people don't know.
I tell this to people all the time, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, and the way you came across with that was not appropriate.
Well, my apologies, I'm just, as I said, my job, I feel an obligation to try to
I understand.
more people know about what it is.
No, I think the preservation is absolutely important, but as somebody who's lived in this community for 35 years, I absolutely know what that school is. I absolutely know what that church is, and I know what those blue bonnets are. So for you to imply otherwise this isn't hurt feelings, this is anger.
Also, when the city says certain people, historically, the city means people from the west side. So when you're saying that, you're also, as someone speaking from the city,
I can tell you, I work for
intentionally
I work for every citizen of Austin.
ignoring
East
people
side, west
who
side.
have already stated that they know
North side,
exactly
south
what that
side.
building is.
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's important as people are talking to reframe the term use. As you're using term land use or building use, you're talking about it as a structured office space or a cafe. What you just heard, people are using this space. People are clearly using this space for community reasons. So when we talk about land use, I think it's really important to recognize what people are saying here. That it's not, it may be sitting there right now and people not from the area may be driving by and not know what it is, but clearly people from the community are using the space for a very important reason.
Yeah, I understand. I also know that except for the strip that's through it, it's privately owned property right now. And so, my job through the historic preservation effort is to try to take a structure and, save it forever through the historic zoning. When a structure is privately owned like that, I have to work with the person I try to get it. You know what I mean? So
But
I
it's
understand
still
that
going
people
to be, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but it's still going, it can be as historic as you want. It's still gonna be privately owned. It's still not gonna be something that the
unless the
community.
city buys it, yeah. And the
Agreed.
city may buy it.
So
Again,
that's a moot
beyond my-
point then. We can't use that as a factor here. Because unless the owner decides to give the community leeway to go and use that space, it's not a community space anymore.
And he won't name a number. The community could buy it from him. He won't give us the sales price.
No longer
It's not just the city.
The property has been privately owned for ages now. So that's a moot point. We can't use that as a factor. We have to take that off the table. This is going to be used, restored perfectly, great. Hopefully it still has the Negro School name on it, but it'll be the Negro School, I don't know, cafe, or movie theater, or megaplex, or whatever it is that he wants to call it, but not for community purposes. So again, it's not a factor.
I can tell you that I am still working with them on what the use
It's
of-
office space. It
what
is
the
what it
use of
is.
the
We
building
can
will be.
just call a spade a spade.
And so, That has been.
I understand, I appreciate the intention, I appreciate the attempt and the owner for coming and dealing with this. This is obviously a hot button issue for the community. But for us to use that as a factor is not okay. We're gonna have to take that off the table.
Okay.
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it or if maybe the owner can answer it, but why this location in particular? Like, when they purchased this property, what did they plan to see there? Did they drive through the neighborhood of Montopolis to look at the community, to observe the community?
The owner of the
And then
property
to decide,
that he
okay,
was
I
not
wanna
aware of the
purchase
history of
this
the building when he
property?
bought it.
He was aware.
Can you repeat that again? I was
So I've been told by the owner of the property that he was not aware when he bought the property.
That's a lie.
History of the building, so.
I'm sorry,
You're
not
from
aware.
that, I'm just telling you that that's right.
Even if you thought it was a church, it was still historic.
He's here in the room. Do y'all want to hear from the? Can we all raise our hand if we want to hear from the developer and thank
most
Mr. Richardson for
definitely.
his presentation?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. Are you willing to answer questions?
At this point, Dave, I feel personally attacked, and so I don't really see it as a.
We feel personally attacked too.
I apologize. I didn't feel
We want
that.
transparency.
So guys, this is
I have a
actually,
question
this is
that won't be
actually
attacking, if I could have a chance to
Okay,
ask
one
a
second, let
question.
me say one thing real quick.
Sure.
So this is a city meeting, about, technically about the plan amendment. So there's not a requirement for participation by anybody in the audience, so I'm gonna move forward then. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a question that I have a lot of things, but I'm gonna try to articulate one question. So it seems like, like you mentioned maybe people drive by the space and they're not aware of it, and I would imagine it sounds like not necessarily people in the community are having that issue, but outside the community. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing that, and one of the reasons that gentrification is happening at such a rapid rate, is that historically, the people in city government have not been valuing structures or cultures or communities like Montopolis. So I don't think that we're going to solve that issue here today. I don't think that we're going to be able to undo what's happening in that sense, but I would like to hear from the developer because I'm interested to see and hear. Clearly, there's going to be some change in that area, but how are we going to create a situation where we don't have the Negro School flanked by white affluence, and how are we going to create a situation where we're holding developers accountable for what's happening in these communities? Because this is happening, this is moving forward in some way or the other, but moving forward from here, how can we ensure that that there's not going to be an erasure of this community altogether, and that, like this woman said, it's not going to become the Negro School Cafe, because that is insane in my mind. So I would like to hear, from the developer if they're comfortable with that. Moving forward, what level of accountability will they have to the community in maybe let's radicalize what's been happening so far. Let's try to throw this gentrification train off the tracks by hearing from the community and being accountable to that community.
Well, again, it's up to Mr. Stahl whether he answers the question. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think that you've raised some larger issues, and as I said, I agree with you, we're probably not going to solve your today. I think, obviously the city is aware of these larger issues. I think, Mr. Stoll is probably interested on this particular piece of property. You know what I mean? There's other factors that are probably beyond his control, larger community issues. But I feel our job, my job here tonight, is to discuss this one piece of property. I can tell you as a city planning department employee, we're aware of those other issues. We discuss it in city council, we discuss them in the office, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, fortunately, the only thing I can focus on is this.
If people ask you specific questions, would you answer them, or would you pick and choose? I mean, honestly, at this point, the agricultural side of this is it's relatively hostile environment, so I'm not comfortable.
What do you
I'll keep taking it.
Welcome to Montopolis.
Leave it alone.
Give us your number, Austin. Give us your number.
Okay, you guys,
Name a number.
so I'm gonna keep going, okay? I know we
Well,
don't
we're gonna
have-
make a number.
I have a question on page, where it looks like 16 and then it goes 14. Where it says existing zoning and proposed zoning, what does it mean that maximum building coverage is 40%, and then on the other side says maximum impervious coverage is, I'm sorry, impervious coverage is 45, and then the other is 90%. También le pongo,
Just say it again.
I'm on page 16 and then 26.
Okay, so what those are, and so for the single family rezoning, which is what the property is zoned right now, impervious cover is what percentage of the property can be covered by a hard surface. So, building, parking lot, sidewalk, driveway. Okay, so there's a certain amount of that on the property, right, it gets built, in your house, there's a certain percentage of that, whatever. And that's called impervious cover. And under SF3, the maximum is 45% of the ground can be covered by cement or asphalt for building. With building coverage, where it's 40% under SF3, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's what percentage of the lot can be covered by a building. So it does not include the driveway or the parking or the sidewalk. So SF3 is 40% building coverage, 45% impervious cover. GR is 90% impervious cover and 75% building coverage.
So does that mean that basically the entire space can be concrete?
Yes, that's exactly what it means.
Under GR, up to 10% of the area.
GR is OBD and no covered
Under
I mean,
the page that you're,
sounds to me like
under
a
the,
regular person.
on the
So-
page you're looking at, under the community commercial zoning category, the initials are GR. The impervious cover would go from 45% to 90%. Okay?
So my question is,
The answer is yes, to what you asked before, could up to
the whole
90%
thing
of
will
the
be
people.
concrete
Yes.
except for the little skinny
Yes,
thing.
but that is something that I will be negotiating with him on what that percentage is. What I can do with that number is I can either go to a lower zoning category, like LR, or we go down to,
Well, we can't negotiate.
or.
We're
I can
all of a sudden
negotiate
stupid or
with him
something?
And do what we call conditional overlay, what Debbie was talking about. Taking that number downward and recommending the city council would be something less than 90%. I'll tell you how I will be doing that. I don't know what the number is yet, but I will not be recommending 90%, maximum 90% for this cover line as well.
So